Hello, everybody. It is Wednesday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My name is Adam Bittner, Assistant Sports Editor for Multimedia at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, here for our weekly Penn State podcast with Isaiah Maldonado, our Post-Gazette and Daily Collegian Nittany Lions insider. We got a lot to get to this week. Huge day for the receivers against Nevada in the opener, racking up a bunch of catches, a bunch of yards, a bunch of plays. Have they turned a corner as a group from last season with all these new transfers in here? Going to talk a little bit about the running game. Did we see enough efficiency from it? Should we not put too much stock into it, considering how little the running backs played? Talk a little bit about the tight ends, denied Dennis Sutton, the national picture, and of course, those Beaver Stadium renovations and how the atmosphere was in Beaver Stadium after tearing down a good chunk of the stadium last season and putting in some temporary stands. Before we get to all that, we want to thank our sponsor for this episode of the podcast. It's ZipRecruiter. Are you having trouble finding the right people to hire? Tired of sorting through endless resumes? Well, the future of hiring looks much brighter because ZipRecruiter's latest tools and features help speed up finding the right people for your roles, so you save valuable time. And now you can try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/audio. With ZipRecruiter's new advances, you can easily find and connect with qualified candidates in minutes. See a candidate you're really interested in? You can unlock their contact info instantly. 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. And if you go to ZipRecruiter.com/audio right now, you can try it for free. Again, that's ZipRecruiter.com/audio. ZipRecruiter is the smartest way to hire. All right, Isaiah, let's dig into it. Penn State had, I think, 16 catches the other day, which would have been their most, or the receivers had 16 catches, I should clarify, which would have been their most in a game since, 2023. I think they maxed out at 14 last season. Of course, that was in another non-conference game against a similarly overmatched opponent. So I guess my question is, are you putting any stock in the receivers looking as good as they did the other day against a bad team, or do they still have to prove it against a good team before you're going to believe in their ability to help this team take the next step? I'll go first. I'm skeptical still. Not to say that these guys can't do it, but I don't think Nevada was going to change my mind.
Adam, so I would agree with you. I would say I'm still a little bit skeptical, but I think it was a really strong start for them. I think obviously if they didn't perform against a non-conference team, especially a team like Nevada that wasn't very good last year in the Mountain West, they would have caught some heat. So I do think that this was a very good starting point. I really like what I saw to Kyron Hudson. Last week I came on and said that he was the one that I was kind of the most skeptical about, and he was by far their best performer. Just being able to see his strengths with getting off the line. He and Drew Allar connected in the end zone. He looked really good at creating separation. It was kind of a question of more so, was he going to be able to keep that separation because he's not the fastest guy, but he's still got pretty solid speed. So I really like what I saw from him. Trebor Pena was very good in the slot, be able to just move the ball up the field. We saw a little bit of his versatility coming out of the backfield in a motion, picked up a 12 or 13-yard rush. So I like what I saw from everybody. Franklin wants to get Ross a little bit more involved as well. I believe he only had 1 catch for 4 yards, something along those lines, but I know he only recorded 1 catch. So not the craziest game from him, kind of uninvolved in the offense. But I think as a strong starting point that I'm okay with this. I like where it's going. I think we obviously want to see them perform better against some non-conference guys, and all three of those guys eat, but I like where they're going so far.
Were you surprised Hudson was the guy who kind of seemed to pop off the most? Because when we were talking last week, we said, who do we have the most expectations for? Who do we have the least expectations for? Kyron Hudson was at the bottom of that list. He ends up having the best day of everyone. I got the stats here. 6 catches, 89 yards. The touchdown, that's an average of 14.8 yards per catch. Pretty good, Isaiah. Does he have the ability to maybe play above those expectations that we were talking about last week? Of course, it's going to get tougher against these, Big Ten opponents that are coming down the line. But did he show you maybe more than you were expecting?
He definitely did. And I think with him, the matter of fact for him was I just felt that he had a lot of boom or bust potential, considering the fact that he was so just efficient with getting off the line. We know about his catch radius. We know about how physical he is in terms of being able to make those 50-50s more of a 7-30, 80-20. But just the speed factor, the route running was a little bit of in question regarding him. But I really like what I saw from him. And I think that his abilities are only going to get better against kind of those more physical Big Ten defenses, because that's where he really thrives. So I do think that he has the potential to play above the expectation that I had from him. I was kind of shocked about Ross, but once again, he was a little banged up heading into the game. So there was probably just that, let's not completely throw him into the fire and run that entire offense around him. But I think he's definitely somebody who I'm going to be super high on. But I think Hudson has the ability to kind of surprise us and be more than just that third option.
Do you think they'll have Ross fully online by the time we get around to Oregon? Of course, injuries can happen at any time, but I think the goal would be, I mean, you could tell that he was not in the flow of the offense the same way Pena and Hudson were. When does that change? Do we want to start seeing more of that this week? Do we want to see it within the next 2 weeks of these non-conference games coming up? What are your expectations for how things are going to play out with him with that big Oregon game looming?
I mean, I think somebody like Ross is somebody that they're going to need against Oregon. When we talk about something that Franklin spoke about after the game, was the lack of big plays. They want to be a little bit more dynamic from an explosive standpoint of moving the ball up the field, not just having those 8-10 yard gains, but let's kind of see more of those plays like we saw with Drew Allar to Hudson for the 30-yard one touchdown. So I think somebody like him who has that big play potential to send them out on a fly, send them out on a post, and have that potential 30-40 yard reception and take it to the house. I think somebody like that is going to be really prominent against a tough Oregon defense. And I do think that in terms of what I want to see from him, I would like to see him get acclimated against a non-conference team like FIU. I think him just getting those reps in and being able to feel a little bit more comfortable within the flow of the offense before tackling an opponent like Oregon would be really good for not only his confidence, but just kind of like a settling him into the system. So I would like to see more out of him in FIU.
Isaiah, let's talk about the tight ends a little bit. Certainly a quiet day relative to what we've become used to with this program with Tyler Warren and some of these other guys. Rolling down the box score here, Andrew Rappelier had 3 catches for 33 yards, but a lot of that came late. Khalil Dinkins, the 1 catch for 24 yards. Luke Reynolds, 2 for 11. So not a huge piece of this offense. I think we've seen at different points. I think we were talking about the tight ends early last season, and they had been somewhat quiet, and then things exploded with Tyler Warren. So any concern there, or let me frame the question this way. Is it maybe good news that they're right-sizing the role of this tight end because their receivers are able to handle more of the load and they don't have to run the offense through these tight ends? They can run it through receivers and let the tight ends make the plays where they're supposed to, and also focus on their work in the running game with blocking, their work in other aspects. Because that's kind of how I look at it. It's like I don't think you really, if you're going to win a national championship, I don't know if a tight end catching 17 balls in a game like Tyler Warren did at USC is the way you're going to do it. You're going to need contributions for the receivers, which means your production at tight end is going to go down, even if you're using them efficiently and maybe more effectively than you were last season.
I agree. Honestly, I think it's a good sign that they weren't too over-reliant on the tight end position. We've heard Franklin kind of talk about how, elite Khalil Dinkins is as a player, both as a pass catcher and as a blocker. He's touted him as one of the best tight ends in the country. So I think having that label on him with how good Franklin expects him to be and how well we've seen him play so far in the offseason and training camp, I think that makes it exciting, but I'm happy that they're not immediately kind of throwing him into that role, because he's never been somebody who is going to go out there and catch routinely 8 balls in a game. And to your point, I agree. I think that you need to have your receivers be the most prominent downfield threat on a national championship caliber team. And coming in, everybody knew that the passing game was going to be the biggest thing in question. So I think the fact that James Franklin and Penn State kind of stuck to their guns and said, we're trying out this passing game and we're not going to fall back on what we know, considering that all of those guys who are Rappelier and Reynolds and Dinkins are familiar to the system. They went with their unknown options with the guys who had only had a few months with the team to practice, and they were still able to go out there and dominate. So I think that's a good sign.
Isaiah, it was not the most efficient day for the running game. 3.8 per carry for the day. not a ton of touches for Singleton and Allen. They had 16 carries total. Nick Singleton only averaged 2.4 yards a carry, but he scored 2 touchdowns for pretty tight end. So that'll limit your yards per carry when there's not that many yards to pick up when you're scoring. So those are 2 your 8 carries. It's going to be hard to have an efficient day. So I'm not reading too much into it on an individual level. I think Nick Singleton and Kaytron Allen would be fine. But were you concerned that maybe we didn't see the efficiency that you might like to see against a team like Nevada with whoever else they were putting in there? I think we mentioned Cam Wallace had a day that certainly grabbed the highlights, so he did the hurdle and everything, but he still finished with 5 carries for 19 yards, 3.8 yards a carry. Just kind of met.
I honestly wouldn't read into it too much, because listening to Franklin kind of talk about how Nevada played against them is, I think, how we're going to see a lot of teams play against them, to where he spoke about kind of seeing that 5 front or the 5 down front and having, multiple guys kind of stack the box, because as he phrased it, their proven commodity is their running game. We know how dangerous the duo of Kaytron Allen and Nick Singleton can be. And if you're going to get beat by a team like Penn State, especially if it's going to be one of these non-conference teams that typically you expect them to lose, they're going to try and force Penn State to beat them off of what they don't know. So because of that, I think that they're going to try and really stack the box. We're going to see more of this 5 down front to keep Singleton and Allen really not struggling, because I wouldn't really consider it struggling if they're not getting the volume, only getting 8 carries for both of them combined, or 16 combined, 8 apiece. It's not super high volume. It doesn't really strike me as shocking. I think Penn State wants to keep trying out and developing this passing game. So I wasn't really too alarmed with it. Like you said, they're star players. I think they're going to continue, and whenever the box isn't stacked, and even when it is, they're going to find a way to make plays. But I do think that as of right now, it shouldn't be alarming.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I just think, if you're a fan, you want to see them dominate in a game like that.
Absolutely.
Like, yes, I know what Nevada wants to do. But I want to see Penn State not allow them to do it. And I think as you go into these next couple of non-conference games, you want to see a little more dominance projecting forward into the Big Ten schedule. Isaiah, thoughts on denied Dennis Sutton? I think he certainly seemed to take the CBS broadcast crew by a little bit of surprise with his 2.5 sacks, pass defended. Brad Nessler was calling him the next Abdul Carter, even though I'm pretty sure he's older than Abdul Carter, or was ahead of him in the class order. So let me frame the question this way. Does he have top 10, top 5 NFL draft potential like Abdul Carter did? Can that be where this season ends for him? So again, you got to consider the opponent. You're facing Nevada. 2.5 sacks against them is different than 2.5 sacks against Ohio State, but it's still adding to your total. So can we see this type of repeated excellence from him, such that maybe he starts shooting up draft boards a little bit?
I think we definitely can. I think the potential is there. I think we have to see it on a much more sustained basis this season. Obviously, his Notre Dame performance last year in the semifinals really took a lot of people by storm. The intos, the tackles for loss, the sacks, he left his mark all over that game. And even though they lost, it really did put a lot of people onto what he can do. And he's made a lot of improvements this offseason. James Franklin kind of accredits this new level of physicality to the fact that he's lost 10 pounds. But you wouldn't be able to tell from a strength standpoint by watching him play. He was living in the Wolfpack's backfield, just sheer dominance on that standpoint. And once again, obviously, it's against Nevada. If he didn't do that, people would have these questions and start raising concerns. But it adds to his total. He's going to continue to do this to non-conference teams. We've seen him do it against top-level competition like Notre Dame. At the time, a top 10 team or a top 12 team. So going into this season with that as his starting point, there's definitely the possibility for him to continue to rack these numbers up, have these great performances. He said that, despite coming back to win a national championship, he wants to break the single season sack record for Penn State. So with that being a goal for him, there's really no limit to what we can see from him from a personal standpoint. I think he definitely does have top 5, might be pushing it. Obviously, we have to see what teams are bad and based on need, but I think he definitely has top 10 potential.
The quarterback volume in this class is going to make it difficult as well, because a lot of those picks that did not go to quarterbacks last season that allowed a guy like Abdul Carter to move up probably are not going to be going to defensive players like him this season, because you're going to have those teams at the top of the order looking at all these quarterbacks who are coming out. So it'll be interesting to keep an eye on that. Isaiah, Penn State stays at number 2 in the polls, despite people loudly talking about how I always love when we get into these the off-season conversation is all about how dumb preseason polls are, and then as soon as the season starts, I mean, like, you rank the teams based on the eye test, right? Like, who you think is going to be the best team over the course of a 4-month season, 5 months now, even if you're getting into January for some of those teams at the end. That's how these teams get ranked. And then we get 1 week of results, and you have people saying LSU should be number 1 after beating Clemson. Clemson couldn't score. I sat there that whole second half. Clemson couldn't do anything. And now we should crown LSU the national champions after 1 week. People are trying to put them number 1, even though they were way down in the order. I don't know where I'm driving at with the question anymore. I think I lost the thread in that rant there. I guess I'll frame it this way. Do you think Penn State can hold that number 2 ranking, given their non-conference schedule over this first month? They can't do anything to impress anybody. And it seems very clear that voters like to be impressed this year. Is it easy to see them falling to 3, 4, 5, even if nothing really changes with how, they're performing relative to our expectations?
I think, it's always hard to gauge the consistency of the AP and the poll and how they do it. Sometimes I feel like 1 week they have a completely different criteria, and then they go to the next. But if we're looking at it right now with Penn State at number 2, and those who trail behind them, LSU, Georgia, Miami, it's hard to see one of those teams overtaking a team like Penn State. I think as long as they continue to dominate non-conference teams until they get to Oregon, that they're pretty solidified at their 2 spot. I think they would have to have a close game against a non-conference team and still come out on top to really fall for no apparent reason. But I mean, to me, I think there should have been conversations just based on how I ranked them. Ohio State didn't look very impressive to me. Obviously, being number 3 and then jumping to number 1, I think there should have been questions around the fact that, it's a 21-point game in total. The Ohio State offense didn't look very prolific. I will give Texas their credit. They have a very, very strong secondary. It's a tough game to play for both sides. So it being low scoring isn't too surprising, but only 2 scores, jumping the gun against a team that dominated while obviously trying new things out. They had over 70 players check in. I think that in itself raised enough of a question in me to question if Ohio State or Penn State was going to be number 1. At the end of the day, I assumed Ohio State would be number 1 because they beat Texas. But in terms of other teams jumping the gun on them for close wins against other ranked teams, I think they would have to really dominate a ranked team. Like the LSU Clemson game was something that I understand why LSU was 3 right now. I probably would have had them somewhere around 3 or 4 after that performance. So I think barring any performances like that, I think Penn State is pretty solidified at 2.
Yeah, it was hard for me to get a read on how I felt about Ohio State. Very conflicted feelings.
Yes.
Not impressed by CJ Donaldson in the backfield. Definitely a strict downgrade on what they had last season. Jeremiah Smith did not look great in that game. Had a couple of drops and did not deal well with the added attention. I think last year you could tell he kind of took some teams by surprise and how explosive he was as a freshman. He's not catching anyone off guard right now, and it seems like he's going to have to make that adjustment. Of course, as far as Penn State's concerned, certainly has time to do that before November, but it does seem like a gear he's going to have to shift against those elite teams. Cardell Tate looked good on that touchdown catch, I guess. So that was it. Does still seem like they have that advantage at receiver. It just does not seem as profound as it was last season. All around, I looked at that game and said, I think Ohio State's a pretty strict downgrade of what it was a year ago. Got to give them credit for the defensive performance against Texas, holding Arch Manning down. But, now everyone's asking questions about Arch Manning and does he have it and what kind of achievement was that really? So I'm not going to make any declarative statements. There's still a lot of season to go. I think we need a few more data points before you can draw any conclusions. But Ohio State did not look like that team that we got used to during that playoff run in week 1. I think that's all you can say at this point. Who do you think is the biggest threat to Penn State knocking Penn State lower in the rankings. You mentioned that you didn't think there were a whole lot of teams. Is it LSU? Is the hype for them just always going to be there because of what that program is? Is it Georgia? I guess for similar reasons but like you said, they were ranked below Penn State for a reason. I think I would say it's LSU at this point at number 3.
I mean, I'll tell you for sure it's not Alabama. Not after that Florida State loss, but in all seriousness about teams that I think are obviously going to contend with us in these top rankings, I think I would have to give it to LSU. I think they're always going to be a prolific offensive team. Garrett Nussheimer is probably, to me, the best quarterback in college football currently. I love what he could do with the ball in his hands, and I think as long as he's at the helm, LSU is going to be competitive. Georgia's another team that I feel like we kind of spoke about this last week about Ohio State, just a team that no matter the turnover can always remain competitive. And I think just from what they have on a defensive standpoint, they're always going to be a super tough team to deal with. Miami, with Carson Beck at the helm now, they're currently ranked at number 5. I don't really put too much stock into them. We'll see what they can do. They had a pretty impressive, semi-impressive week 1 win. So, but I think that main threat is
they did the things. They did those things late in that game.
They did
not do in that same stadium against that same team. And I know Notre Dame's lost some guys, but I give them credit. It was the same place, same type of game of like not especially high scoring, but there was some offense kind of rolling in that second half. Notre Dame makes that same push that they did against Penn State in the Orange Bowl, and Miami finds a way to hold them off. So I do have to give them some level of credit for that.
No, definitely. I'm not a believer, but they have my respect until they lose it otherwise.
Isaiah, what did you make of the stadium renovation debut? Obviously kind of a weird situation because you're mid-construction. This is not how it's going to look a year from now. Did it take away from the atmosphere, though? Were the lines a problem? I know there's a lot of complaints at the Pitt game. Is this season going to be I guess I had the fear that, and this might be why I don't go up to Happy Valley for a game this year, that it's going to be a mess because it's a half reconstructed stadium. What was your vibe of the day?
I think just kind of being able to sit at the press box and see kind of everything from a bird's eye view, if you will, just have like a complete total view of the stadium. I don't feel like it took away from the atmosphere. I think if anything, it kind of only shows how committed the Penn State fan base is to have that temporary seating packed out the way that it was. And, obviously I think season opener is kind of a hard thing to gauge for attendance. No matter who you play, it's a season opener. People are happy college football is back. They're going to go to it. I might have a better gauge of, if that temporary seating or if everything being under construction is going to affect it against FIU. But even then, it's a Thon game. So I think Penn State itself has such a loyal fan base and has such a cult following around it that it's always going to be that just like Happy Valley environment. People are going to go out there, support, love the team. It's always going to be loud. It's always going to be electrifying. You're going to see a bad play. You're going to hear the boos. You're going to see a good play. You're going to hear the screams, the hypes. So I think that as of now, I don't really think it's taken anything away from the atmosphere. If anything, I think it only just kind of reinforces how electrifying Beaver Stadium can be.
Yeah, I guess you just always wonder about the acoustics because when the Steelers went from Three River Stadium, which was a completely closed cookie cutter, to having that open end at Acrisure Stadium, people just never felt the same as it did at Three River Stadium. I wonder how redoing an entire half of the stadium is going to affect Penn State over the long run. It looks like it's going to be arguably more closed in than it was before. So I think you'd expect the sound to be there, but during this one season interlude, is it still going to be there with those temporary stands and maybe some of that noise escaping a little bit? So we'll keep an eye on that as we roll toward the whiteout. Isaiah, thank you for joining me this week. Always good to get your perspectives. You'll be back on Saturday after Penn State FIU with your post-game recap video. So make sure you're subscribed to the channel for all of that. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Help us out in the YouTube algorithm as we are hoping to grow here. We will talk to you again next week.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.